Something inside you knows. It knows that behind all certainties, there's an emptiness that doesn't go away. That no matter how much you move, something essential remains still. What we call life might just be the surface of an ocean you haven't had the courage to dive into. Carl Jung once said, "True freedom only arises when you see and transcend this illusion." Everything we consider reality, beliefs, identity, desires, success, may just be a conditioned mental construct. In this video, we're going to explore why most people live on autopilot, and more importantly, how to break free from it. You'll understand what really happens when you start to break free from those inner chains, and why this might be the most important turning point of your life. So watch until the end, because what starts today might be the beginning of a whole new way of living. Lighter, truer, more yours. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. The way you behave, what you say about yourself, the decisions you make to be accepted, all of it was learned. The image you show the world was built over the years, shaped by expectations, repetition, wounds, and rewards. A character designed to function. Over time, that character becomes identity. The mask sticks to the face, and the role starts to feel real. Carl Jung said that the ego, this image we create of ourselves, is part of life, but it's not the center. It helps shape things, but it doesn't show the essence. When the ego takes up all the space, everything outside it feels strange, threatening, or pointless. That's when a hard-to-name feeling begins to arise. A void, a discomfort, a silent question that doesn't go away. Even when everything seems in place, something inside stirs. Life feels right, but not real. That feeling marks the beginning of awakening. It reveals that what seemed solid is actually fragile. That routine isn't enough. That the character no longer represents who you are. Something in you is asking for truth, and not the truth they taught you, but the one that's born from listening. That question begins to grow stronger. Who am I without the roles I've learned to play? That question changes everything. It doesn't come from the mind. It comes from a deeper, older place. It doesn't demand an immediate answer. It asks for silence, presence, courage to look beyond the surface. Real life begins when you recognize that what you called reality was just a script. When you realize you were trained to please, to avoid rejection, to seek approval, but that there's something bigger than all of that. Awakening isn't about leaving the world. It's about seeing it with new eyes. It's realizing that the certainties you believed in were just repeated stories, and that behind all the adaptation, there's someone waiting to be remembered. Truth doesn't require effort. It shows up when the layers fall away, and deep down, you feel it. That calling was always there. Over time, the image you've learned to maintain starts to get heavy. You notice there's a gap between what you show and what you really feel. And that gap comes with a high cost. The persona, in Carl Jung's psychology, is that social version of you created to fit in. If you've been following the channel, you've probably noticed how often we talk about this concept. The persona is one of the foundations of Jungian psychology, and we mention it a lot because it shows up in everything. Relationships, decisions, crises, the feeling of emptiness. If you want to dive deeper into this, I highly recommend watching the video I'll link in the cards. We go into more detail there about how the persona is formed and how it plays out in daily life. But here's what you need to know right now. The persona isn't wrong. It's part of the growth process. It helps you function in the world. But over time, it needs to be put in its proper place. The problem starts when it takes over everything, when it stops being a tool and becomes a hiding place. That's when life starts to lose authenticity. You respond with the same old answers. You laugh on autopilot. You go through your obligations, play your role. But inside, something has already disconnected. Most people don't notice this right away, but the body feels it. The soul feels it. The signs begin. Fatigue without reason, frequent irritation, identity crises, a sadness that comes and goes. It's not drama. It's not weakness. It's the call for something more authentic. The longer you live through the persona, the harder it becomes to access your own truth, because it works like a filter. Anything that doesn't match that image gets pushed down, muffled, hidden. Suppressed anger, ignored vulnerability, the desire for change that never leaves the ground. And here's where the big risk lies. You start to believe that what you feel is wrong, that you need to improve, to control yourself, to readjust. But in truth, all of it is a sign that a deeper part of you wants to come out. Once you begin to notice this conflict, there's no turning back. What once seemed like your way of being now feels like a prison. All that control becomes exhaustion. That need to look fine becomes a suffocating silence. Tell me in the comments if you've ever felt this way. But that's when the transformation begins. You don't need to fight the persona or try to destroy the image you created. What you need is to recognize that there's something deeper asking for space. A part of you that no longer wants to pretend or please. It just wants to be. After the persona starts to crumble, something inside tries to keep things as they were. That voice that insists on controlling everything. It wants to preserve the structure, maintain order, protect everything that was built. It's like it's saying, if I'm not in control, everything falls apart. That internal narrator defines what you like, what you can't tolerate, what you believe in. Its job? To create a timeline. Past, future, goals, stories, all revolving around one central axis. This is who I am. But this source of identity has a fundamental limit. It believes your whole life can fit into that tiny concept. In Jungian psychology, the ego is just one part of consciousness. It serves as a mediator between you and the outside world, but it can't embrace the fullness of who you are. When it tries to take the central throne, the result is always the same: tension, anxiety, over-control, rejection of the unknown. This is where many people get stuck, because that defense mechanism fears the void. It trembles before anything it can't measure, classify, or predict. And it's precisely in that mapeless territory that the most vibrant and transformative parts of existence live. The ego resists, but life insists. Disturbing dreams, overblown reactions, unexplained anxiety. All traffic signs showing that something beyond the conscious radar wants to surface. Something that can't be dominated, only recognized. The crisis of not knowing who I am anymore is not a system failure. It's an invitation to let go of old labels and find what exists before the names. A shift from building to listening. That controlling voice will try to reclaim the center countless times. It will rationalize, dissect, try to reduce mystery to concepts. And that's okay. It's just doing its job as guardian of the known. But you didn't come here to repeat. You came to find yourself. Real life doesn't begin when everything is under control. It begins when control loses its urgency. When listening outweighs rigidity. When that psychic structure stops ruling and starts serving. True freedom is born when you see and transcend the fiction. In practice, that means, as long as you're identified with the persona, with others' expectations, with what's socially acceptable, you'll live like someone listening to music too loud to hear their own melody. As long as that identity source is the sun of your universe, everything outside its orbit will feel like a threat. Intense emotions, deep doubts, inevitable changes, all treated as enemies instead of messengers. It traps you in a bubble, an idea of yourself that demands constant protection. But inside that dome, there's no evolution, just the endless return of the same. Seeing the illusion is the beginning of realizing that bubble isn't the real world, that the identity you built, however smart, functional, or successful, doesn't represent the totality of your being. Transcending the illusion doesn't mean giving up everything or detaching from the world. It means letting go of blind identification with what you were taught. It's about making room for what's true in you, even if it has no clear form or immediate explanation. Freedom begins the moment you stop hiding behind your stories. When you no longer need to uphold the image of being strong, right, spiritual, or in control. When you're no longer afraid to be contradictory, sensitive, confused. Because you know that's also you. The freedom Jung talks about isn't external. It doesn't come from what you achieve. It comes from what you integrate, from what you allow yourself to see, hear, feel, even if it's uncomfortable at first. That's what marks the start of the real journey. The illusion falls away when you stop chasing who you think you should be, and start allowing who you truly are to emerge. From this point on, the search changes direction. Instead of clinging to what you show, you begin to investigate what's hidden. And the more you access what lies behind the visible, the more whole you begin to feel. Even when you think you're in control, there's something behind your decisions, emotions, and reactions that doesn't follow logic. It's like a part of you is acting in silence, beyond the reach of reason. That part is the unconscious. In Carl Jung's psychology, the unconscious isn't just a storage of forgotten memories. It's active, it has force, it has language, it has intention. It shows up in dreams, in slips of the tongue, in impulses you don't understand, in emotions that seem to come out of nowhere, in patterns you try to avoid but keep repeating. It's like you're on stage, but the one writing what happens behind the curtain is it. While the ego thinks it's running the show, the unconscious is guiding your life along paths beyond your will. And that's not a bad thing. On the contrary, it's one of the keys to breaking free from illusion. When you start observing your dreams, your automatic reactions, the patterns that repeat without explanation, you realize there are messages in them, as if life is trying to show you something, not in plain words, but in symbols, in sensations, in repetitions that won't stop until you finally listen. The unconscious is not against you. It carries everything that was repressed, forgotten, or set aside so the persona and ego could maintain the illusion of control. But there's a limit to that. Everything that was ignored comes back sooner or later, asking for attention. That's why true transformation often begins with what looks like chaos. A disturbing dream, an emotional breakdown, an unexpected fall. These moments aren't punishment. They're invitations. Signs that something inside you needs to be seen more deeply. True freedom, like we said before, begins when you transcend the illusion, and that includes letting go of the idea that you're in control of everything. You're not. But you can begin to listen to what truly moves you. You don't need to understand everything. You just need to be willing to feel, honestly, to recognize that what comes from within carries more truth than any external image. And from this point on, the journey starts to touch deeper places, because what you try to hide is exactly what needs to be integrated the most. You were taught to show your strengths, to highlight what's beautiful, admirable, acceptable. And you also learned to hide what doesn't fit. Anger, jealousy, envy, vanity, fear. All of that got pushed out of consciousness, away from your ideal image. That hidden part has a name, the shadow. In Carl Jung's psychology, the shadow is everything you've repressed to maintain the image of a good, controlled, mature person. But it doesn't disappear. It stays there, in the background, waiting for a chance to emerge. And when it does, it usually comes with force, because it's been ignored for too long. The illusion here is believing you're only what you show, only the evolved side, only the conscious part. When you believe too much in your own goodness, you start projecting everything you can't accept in yourself onto others. What you condemn in others might be exactly what you haven't had the courage to face in yourself. And that's not an accusation. It's a chance to know yourself better. Because the shadow isn't evil. It's part of your humanity. It's what was excluded out of fear, shame, or habit. And the more you push it away, the more fragmented you feel. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean giving in to impulses. It means recognizing they exist, that you are contradictory, that inside you live both light and darkness, courage and fear, kindness and selfishness. All of this together makes up the human being you are. Denying the shadow creates a kind of emotional rigidity, a way of living where everything always has to be right. But life isn't like that, and no one can maintain that perfection for long without hurting inside. When you start to look at your shadow with honesty, you don't become worse. You become whole, and being whole is far more powerful than seeming good. The freedom we seek also depends on this, on no longer needing to hide what you feel, or justify every flaw, on being able to say, I'm not only light, and that's okay. The shadow doesn't need to be feared. It needs to be acknowledged, because it's in that encounter that healing begins. There's a kind of prison most people don't notice right away. It has no bars, no walls. On the contrary, it looks like movement, ambition, seeking, but that's exactly why it holds so tight. It's the prison of desire. Your whole life you were taught to desire. Since childhood, you were taught to chase approval, achievement, affection, safety. Each goal brings temporary relief, and then a new lack, a new goal, a new urgency. It's like something in you is never complete, like a piece is always missing. Schopenhauer said that to desire is to suffer. Krishnamurti said desire is illusion. Jung agreed, but took it further. For him, the issue isn't desire itself, but the fact that often it doesn't come from you, but from the unconscious. In other words, you think you're choosing, but you're being pushed from within, without knowing why. That's how desire becomes a trap. You want to be accepted, admired, recognized, but who inside you is asking for that? Is it your essence, or is it a wounded part from the past, still waiting to be seen? Most people live stuck in this cycle without realizing it. They achieve something, feel brief relief, then another need shows up. And so it goes, a constant effort, believing that the next thing will fix everything, but the next thing never does. And the more you feed this cycle, the further you get from yourself. Because endless desire robs you of the present. It constantly pushes you forward. It won't let you stop, or feel, or notice what already exists right now. This doesn't mean you should live without desire. It means you need to start noticing where your desire comes from. When you understand its origin, it stops being a prison and becomes conscious direction. Desire only imprisons when you believe you have to chase something to be whole. When you understand you already are whole, desire becomes choice, not urgency. That awareness changes everything, because where there was haste, now there's presence. Where there was lack, now there's clarity. And where there was illusion, appears the freedom to want without getting lost in wanting. You think you're seeing the world as it is, but in truth, you're seeing the world as you are. The human mind doesn't record reality neutrally. It interprets, filters, chooses what to perceive. And that perception is shaped by everything you carry inside. Experiences, wounds, fears, unmet desires, unaccepted parts. The world becomes a mirror. When you feel angry at someone, for example, it's worth pausing and asking, is this anger really about the other person? Or is something in me being triggered? When you feel envy, jealousy, intense admiration, what's being revealed? It's hard to admit, but everything that stirs you emotionally carries a message about yourself. That's the basis of what Jung called projection, the act of seeing outside what hasn't yet been acknowledged inside. That doesn't mean everything is in your head. It means the way you interpret events is connected to your inner state. Reality isn't entirely objective. It gains color, shape, and meaning through the lens you're using. And if that lens is clouded with old hurts, distorted beliefs, or fragile self-images, everything you see outside will carry that distortion. This is a major turning point, because it shows you can't change the world without first changing the way you see yourself, without cleaning the lens, without taking responsibility for your own perception. It's not about blaming yourself. It's about getting to know yourself. When you realize that what irritates you in others might be showing something about you, you open a door to healing. When you understand that your exaggerated admiration for someone might be revealing a potential in you that hasn't yet been lived, you start to grow for real. That shift is liberating, because it takes the focus off external control and brings it back to what really matters. What's happening inside? The world doesn't need to be fought. It needs to be understood. And often the first step is to stop pointing fingers and start listening to the mirror. The more you recognize your projections, the lighter life becomes. Conflicts ease, patterns break, and slowly, the world stops being a threat and starts becoming an opportunity for self-discovery. Letting go of illusions sounds beautiful in theory, but in practice, it's uncomfortable. Not because it's hard to release what's false, but because behind the illusion, there's a space that scares you, the void. For years, you've clung to your stories, to the image you built of yourself, to the certainties that seem to keep you standing. When those structures start to collapse, it feels like you've lost the ground beneath your feet. No name, no direction. That's when many people retreat. Truth isn't hard to find. It reveals itself when you start to let go of roles, expectations, and rehearsed speeches. What makes it challenging is the fear of being nothing after all that. The ego is terrified of the void. It needs explanations, identity, control. It needs to feel like it knows who it is, where it's going, and what's coming next. When that sense of control fades, an inner silence arises. And that silence at first feels like absence. But what seems like absence is actually pure presence. The ego doesn't recognize this. It calls it loss, crisis. It does everything it can to return to the old narrative. It reacts with anxiety, doubt, resistance. It tries to rebuild the former story just to avoid facing that open space that appears when you start to let go. But that space is not a hole, it's a doorway. That's where reconnection begins. Because everything that's true in you needs no explanation. No social role, no mask, no approval. It just needs space. The void is where illusions die. But it's also where what is essential can finally be born. At this point, many people try to escape. They distract themselves, stay busy, overthink everything. But those who choose to stay, even in the discomfort, discover something rare. There is life in that silence. There is strength in not knowing. There is a presence that doesn't depend on any definition. It's in that place that the ego loses control, and at the same time you begin to feel more alive than ever. The path doesn't require you to know everything. It asks for the courage to stay with what is real, even when that means not knowing who you are. Yet, after so long trying to maintain an image, to fit into an identity, to hold up a narrative, a quiet, powerful question begins to emerge. Is there something in me that doesn't depend on any of that? Jung called that something the self. The self isn't another identity. It's not a new character or a better version of who you think you should be. It's the true center, the balancing point between what you know and what you haven't yet seen, between what you show and what you feel, between the conscious and the unconscious. The ego tries to control life. The self observes. The ego reacts. The self responds. When necessary, the ego seeks affirmation. The self simply is. You feel the self in moments when everything aligns inside you, even if the outer world is chaotic, when something touches you deeply and you can't explain why, when a choice comes with quiet certainty, even if it defies logic, or when a difficult situation arises and instead of falling apart, you feel present, whole, alive. The self isn't a theory, it's an experience. It's what remains when you let go of everything false. It's what reveals itself when the noise dies down. It's a silent but powerful presence, something within you that's always been there, but was buried under the noise of external demands. Maybe you've never stopped to really listen to it. Maybe you felt it before, but never named it. And that's okay. The self doesn't need a name. It just needs to be recognized. Reconnecting with the self brings a sense of home, not a home made of walls and certainty, but an inner space where you no longer have to prove yourself or explain, where you allow yourself to be whole with everything you feel, without needing to fit an ideal self-mold. That center doesn't require effort to exist. It just asks you to stop resisting. The further you move from the persona, the ego, and the constant need for validation, the closer you get to that quiet core. And life, little by little, begins to take on a different tone. It's no longer about performance. It's about presence. And when you align with that, what used to be a search becomes a discovery. Distancing yourself from the persona, recognizing the shadow, connecting with the self. None of this happens overnight. It's not a mystical experience that changes you forever. It's a process, and Jung called that process individuation. Individuation is becoming whole. It's when you start moving away from ready-made ideas of who you should be, and step by step, get closer to who you already are inside, but haven't fully lived yet. It has nothing to do with being special. The process of individuation doesn't turn anyone into a superior, enlightened, or flawless being. It simply brings you closer to your own truth, and that alone changes everything. With each layer of illusion that falls, a real piece of you emerges. Sometimes with clarity, sometimes with pain, sometimes with relief, but always with power. This path isn't made to please others, or to feed the ego with the idea that you've found yourself. It's quiet, ongoing, internal. Almost no one sees it, but you feel it. And that's enough. Along the way, you'll face moments of expansion and contraction. You'll feel like you're doing great, and then suddenly feel lost again. That's part of it. Because the individuation process isn't linear. It happens in cycles, in waves, in layers. Every challenge, every crisis, every loss can be a doorway. As long as you don't run. As long as you choose to look, even without knowing what you'll find. The illusion truly starts to crack when you accept walking without guarantees. When you no longer need to cling to a role, an idea, an image. When you realize that being whole is much more real than appearing healed. This path takes courage, but gives something rare in return. Integrity. A life where you no longer need to hide parts of yourself. A way of being where the inner and outer start having more honest conversations. And that truth doesn't shout. It doesn't demand a stage. It doesn't need a label. It simply lives in you and reveals itself in the way you relate, choose, listen, feel. With every genuine step, illusion loses power. And what arises in its place isn't a new story, but a new way of being present. There's a trap that comes after many others. It's more subtle, harder to notice, and for that reason, more dangerous. It's the illusion that you've already awakened. After spending time immersed in self-knowledge, studying, meditating, going through deep processes, it's easy to believe you've arrived, that you've figured it out. that you're free, that you're above the average or outside the cycle that traps others. And the ego loves that idea. It doesn't want to disappear, so it adapts, creates a new version of itself, now spiritual, aware, evolved. This version is polished, speaks beautifully, understands the concepts, but deep down, it's still trying to prove itself. Jung warned about this. He said, even the light casts a shadow. In other words, even your pursuit of awareness can hide a new kind of denial, of escapism, of vanity. This new spiritual persona can be even more resistant to truth than the old one, because it disguises itself as transcendence. It doesn't recognize itself in conflict. It avoids vulnerability. It pretends everything is already resolved, but no one is fully resolved. Everyone carries wounds, fears, resistances, and that doesn't make you less, it makes you human. Real clarity isn't the kind that thinks it's done. It's the kind that keeps learning. That knows there will always be unseen parts, subtle patterns, unprocessed emotions. The final illusion is thinking you've arrived, that there's nothing left to see. But the ones who are truly awake don't feel superior. They feel more humble, more present, more open to listening, even to their shadow, when it reappears. Real spirituality is quiet. It doesn't rely on buzzwords or need to be displayed. It lives in small choices, in how you treat others, in how honest you can be with what you feel without hiding behind a character, no matter how aware it seems. Awakening is not the end. It's just the beginning of a new way of being in the world, with more truth, more listening, and less certainty. And if you can remember that, that's already a sign you're on the right path. After everything you've lived, the masks you had to wear, the truths you avoided, the roles you played, the desires that drove you, the fears you tried to hide, maybe now it's time for a different question. What's left? When all of that falls away, many people reach this point expecting to find the truth, as if it were a clear answer, a new identity, a final certainty. But what you find here is something else. Silence, space, presence. Truth doesn't arrive as a new theory. It has no form, no explanation. It doesn't fulfill the ego's promises. It simply remains. And what remains, when everything else loses meaning, is what truly belongs to you. Not what you were taught, not what they expected, not what you tried to be to feel accepted. What remains is you. Whole, stripped of illusion, truly alive. And that's where freedom begins. Not as a final state, but as a new way of walking through the world, without the need to carry unnecessary weight, without needing to prove anything to anyone, without hiding from yourself. Jung said, the unlived life is a disease of the soul, and the only possible cure is to start living yours, with everything it holds, with pain, beauty, doubts, simplicity, silence, with humanity. Truth doesn't require effort. It doesn't need an ideal self. It just needs space to exist. Maybe your journey so far has been shaped by trying to fit in, to make sense, to be someone. But now you know, the meaning isn't in the character. It's in presence. It's in the now. It's in being able to feel, live, and be, without more layers between you and life. And even if nothing has changed on the outside, something inside has already begun to shift. Lighter, clearer, more honest. This is the point where everything begins again. Not to become someone different, but to finally live as you are, without pretending, without protecting yourself, without chasing anything. You're here. That's enough. If you've made it this far, drop a comment below. The illusion fell, and I'm still here. That phrase shows you watched until the end, and that you're ready to live with more truth. If you'd like to support the channel more directly, you can click on the thanks button down below. Any financial support makes a difference and helps this content reach more people and go even further. Thank you for walking this path with me. I'll see you in the next video.